right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to another episode of ITProTV. I'm your host, Don Pezet, back again with more CompTIA IT Fundamentals. And in this episode, we're continuing our adventure with computer hardware, and we're focusing specifically into BIOS, which is what we left off in part one. Now, if you didn't watch part one, it's exciting, it's action-packed, adventure-filled, excitement around every corner. You definitely want to check that out. But here in part two, we're focusing on one very particular system, which is the BIOS that powers or that really controls what our system does. And here to help us better understand that is Mr. Ronnie Wong. Ronnie, thanks for joining us.
Well, Don, thank you for having me on the show as we continue to take a look at the idea of the common hardware. And we are diving into that realm of BIOS, which stands for Basic Input Output System. So we want to make sure that we understand what it does for us. So we're going to show you the entire process of where it fits into the boot process as well. And then we're going to dive into it so that we can see some of the different settings that are in there that we can maybe, if depending on the system itself, how much you can tweak it or change it to modify what you actually need to. It's a very important part of every single computer system that's out there. So it's something that we should be familiar with as we get started.
Now, Ronnie, you threw out a big maybe there, right, which comes down to something we did talk about briefly in the last episode, which is every computer has a BIOS, right? That's what's responsible for booting our computer up. But not every BIOS is created the same. There are different companies that manufacture them. So what we're going to show you on this episode is actually a pretty advanced BIOS, one that has a ton of features. Yours may have far less, far fewer. Yours might have more, right? It depends on the type of board that you buy and the features that the vendor chooses to support. So do be aware of these variations. But from a general principle, every computer is going to have this hardware, and it all performs a very important function. So, Ronnie, where should we get started with BIOS?
Well, when we start to take a look at where it works, right, the easiest place for us to get started in the understanding the BIOS is what it does in the part of the boot process. So we just want to boot up our system so that we can see what actually happens to our system, and then we'll actually get into the BIOS and show you what goes on. Okay. So right now, what I have is a computer that is turned off. And this is important because when we start talking about the idea here of turning on a computer, there's a bunch of different processes. You and me, we might have come to expect we just turn the power button on and, well, magic, it just appears and you're like, okay, we're ready to go. But in the background of everything else that's happening, there's a bunch of different things that are happening right at the beginning that it has to make sure that everything can function the way that it needs to before it turns the system on, or you might burn out a component, or you might actually end up damaging something. So right away, there's a lot of different things that are going on, and that's what we want to see.
All right, so Ronnie, what we can do is let's cut over to this machine, and what we're going to see is a black screen because, well, the computer is turned off, right? So I'm going to push the power button, and why don't you walk us through what's happening?
Sure.
This is the exciting role that I get to perform here. I'm going to just push this button on the computer, but a lot of stuff starts happening beyond just this little button push.
Right, so let's go ahead and full screen this. I know it's kind of weird, but we'll see the black screen. So as I'm talking in the background, now the power button is actually being pushed. What is starting to happen, of course, is that the power supply itself is now turning on. Everything is beginning to happen. This is where BIOS is starting to take over originally, right? So you're getting it where you're now seeing the screen that we're just seeing, and it actually gives us an option to go into BIOS. But it's gone through a power on self-test, and this is where you're getting to see some of those options. So it showed you a hard drive. It showed you some of the options here. And even right here, Don, it shows us that we can get into, it looks like the network adapter, that we can choose that as a boot option as well. So it's registering all of the different things that are happening. Now that little tiny circle that we saw, Don, it's kind of unusual in today's systems to see a bunch of anything anymore. But at one point, if we were running a Windows operating system, this is where we would see seen a big splash screen, and then it would have launched into Windows. But for us, that is the recognition that the operating system is now loaded, and this is what we have running on this computer, Don. Here is the full operating system that's running. And so this process took place very quickly in comparison to the computers that I had when I was first growing up with them.
All right, so let's talk about some of the things that we saw there. So first off, if you're not familiar with it, ASRock is a company that manufactures motherboards, and they've manufactured the motherboard for this system. In part one, we were using one from a company called Asus. So there's a number of different companies that are out there. They all manufacture boards typically to the same standard, so it usually doesn't matter which vendor you get, but some are higher quality than others. So ASRock, they do a pretty good job. They manufactured this board, so that was the first logo that we saw when the system booted. Then we saw a storage controller. Now, your system may or may not have a separate storage controller. If you have multiple hard drives, you'll start to see messages about that. And this particular box is actually a server that we use here in the building. It's got a lot. How many hard drives does it have, Ronnie? Like 8?
Yeah, several.
It has a bunch of hard drives. So that's what was all being listed on that screen there. And then after that, we saw the network adapter for a moment. In an enterprise environment, your system might not boot off of its hard drive. It might boot off of a network server somewhere. And so that was the third thing that we saw before finally seeing that spinning wheel. Now, when we see that spinning wheel, Ronnie, that's not the BIOS anymore, right?
Right. So that's where the BIOS hands it over. So once everything is recognized hardware, the BIOS now says, look, I now need an operating system to boot up, and it hands that over to the first device that it can boot to. And when you see that going, it's saying, I found the device, now it's looking for that bootable operating system so that you and I as humans can interact with the computer and the hardware and do everything that we need to. So ours, because we're running it as a server, right? An environment in which somebody's not going to sit down at this computer on a daily basis and use it, it just gives us a command prompt, because what we need to do is we need to set it up and let it run and do what it's designed to do in the background.
Yeah, if this were one of our desktops, it would boot to a pretty desktop. We'd see a start button and our application icons and all of that. But servers are purpose-built. So this one boots up and it goes right to this screen. But you know what? Your computer at home, it runs through the same process. Some computers do a better job of hiding it than others. So for example, I have a Mac. And when I turn on my Mac, I just immediately see the Apple logo. And then it goes into the operating system. You don't see the BIOS at all. Well, that's because Apple manufactures the motherboard and the computer and the BIOS that they use and the operating system. Since Apple manufactures all of that, they can hide it as much as they want. But in the PC world, it may be where Microsoft makes the operating system and ASRock makes the motherboard and Phoenix makes the BIOS. You get all these different companies involved. And so it becomes more difficult to hide that. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. And when you boot your system up, you may see more or less feedback as a part of that. I mean, if there's an error, obviously you'll see a lot of feedback because it's telling you something's wrong. But if there's no errors, it's usually just a couple of screen flickers that occur, and then you boot into your operating system, and that's the end of it. But Ronnie, I know it's not just as simple as that. BIOS is doing a lot, but there's more screens that we can access when it comes to dealing with BIOS, right?
Right. So when we start dealing with the idea of BIOS here, there is a lot more that we can get into. This goes back to what we were saying before. It depends on the not on the operating system, on the actual BIOS that's running on the computer too. So if you can get launched into it, you may see where you get a lot of settings. You may see where you don't get a lot of settings. But speaking of that, Don, as you were talking, it reminded me of something. During that power, when we first pushed the power button, you might also end up hearing the idea of, or some of the sound, right? So what you actually end up doing here is that you end up hearing, beeps is what you might hear. Now, not every system will do it, but those are part of that power on self-test where you might hear some different codes that are going on. And normally it used to be where if you only heard one beep, that was like, okay, everything's good. That meant power on self-test was good, and then it was ready to proceed on. But if all of a sudden you hear a series of them, they all used to mean something a little bit different, and that would alert you that something was going wrong at that point. So this is a great reminder for us that every system may be a little bit different today. Like Don said, if they're hiding it better, you might not hear anything at all and just shows you an error right away because that's easier for people to read.
Yeah, and if it's a significant error, like if it's an error with the CPU or an error with the video card, it can't show you an error at all. So it has to have some mechanism, and that beep is a great way to do it. The one that's really hard to troubleshoot is when it's the power supply that's the problem, because then you can't even turn it on. Although I guess maybe that one symptom is enough. But that's all a part of what BIOS is doing for us, is to help make sure that our hardware is healthy, to then turn it over to the operating system. Now, the operating system might be totally hosed, who knows, right? But at least on the hardware side, everything tests out okay, enough to be able to boot. There might be some supplemental hardware that's not working, but CPU, RAM, storage, and network, those are kind of the three things that get checked. You can boot without network. You can also boot without storage if you're booting from the network, so there's a few that can sub out. But CPU and memory, those have to work. And then your video adapter needs to work in order for you to be able to see your input and output. Now,
Right.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Well, no, yeah, Donna, as we start taking a look at this, right? So we want to be able to get back into that BIOS, but now that I'm in the operating system, I can't do it from here. I essentially need to go ahead and I need to reboot the computer. And from that point, this is where things get a little bit harder, especially on modern computer systems. Don, at one point, we could reboot the computer, Don could go and get coffee, come back and go, oh, it's time for me to hit the button that gets us into BIOS. But Don today, it's so fast, you almost have to stare at the screen itself. Have you found yourself where you missed it a couple of times?
Oh, tons of times. You know, for the more eagle-eyed viewers out there, you might have noticed during the boot screen, there was one part at the bottom right where there was a microscopic text on the screen. Well, if you could read it, it was saying you could press a key to be able to get into the BIOS. It was only up for, what do you think, Ronnie?
Maybe a second, maybe?
A full second?
Yeah.
So if you hit it in that right amount of time, you can access the BIOS configuration and do all sorts of crazy things. But if you miss it, the system boots up, you've got to shut down, and you've got to boot back up again. And a lot of times, restarting isn't enough.
Right.
The BIOS is typically engaged when you're coming from a cold boot. A cold boot means the computer is totally off, and you push the power button and it's coming on for the first time. A reboot is what's considered a warm boot. The hardware is all already turned on. It's just the operating system that's being reset. So on a lot of computers, if you want to access the BIOS, you actually have to shut them all the way down and then power them back on. So do we want to show them that, Ronnie?
Yeah, so I just went ahead and I shut down this particular operating system here. And in that menu system that you saw, it was a number, okay? And if you're listening, I don't know how sensitive the microphones are. All of a sudden, my voice got really loud by comparison to the noise that was in this room. So the computer has just shut off manually at this point. So what we want to do is we want to start that process again, just like we did at the beginning of the episode. But now we want to enter the BIOS, and we're going to zoom in on the lower right-hand corner of the screen so that we can see the options that are there. Okay, so as we start. So let's go ahead and Don, if you'll go ahead and press the power button for us.
And when Ronnie was talking about the volume, he's talking about the fans in the system. There's fans that power up when the system is on, and it when the fans go quiet, it's always kind of a strange sound.
All right, so here we are. Okay, so this is where we have to kind of watch, and when that screen kicks up, you'll see multiple options that are actually available for us, and it's right there. Okay, and I want to make sure I hit either the F2 or the delete button, which I just did. And now you're seeing part of this go through. Now, as we start to see some of the additional options, it still looks like it's going through the boot process. So, Don, there's one of two things that may have happened here.
You potentially missed the key, right?
I potentially missed the key, which it looks like I absolutely did. So, and that's because I was talking while I was Don, you distracted me. Okay?
I ruined everything.
Well, it happens, right? Especially as fast as the systems are, and that's why I wanted to kind of warn us. So let's try it one more time here, Don, and see what we can do.
All right, while he's doing that, we'll let him concentrate. And I just want to mention a few things. You might have noticed where it said you could press F2 or delete to access BIOS. We had two different choices, right? Well, computers can use whatever key command sequence they want for BIOS access. It's whoever manufactures the motherboard or the BIOS that picks what that keystroke command is going to be. Some use F1, some use Shift F1 or Control F1, which are super annoying. Some use F10. But by and large, F2 and delete, those are the two most common. Ronnie, I'm going to apply power here.
All right.
So those are the most common, F2 and delete. And if we go full screen, we can catch it when that message comes up. So it's going to pop up. I won't zoom in this time. We'll just focus on hitting it. But when you press those sequences, then it's going to take us into BIOS. Now, if you don't know what keystrokes to hit, right? This one, it's going to give us a little message right there. So we get the message, and Ronnie's just tapping the key on the keyboard. Doesn't hurt to hit it more than once. You usually don't want to hold it down, though. And what's going to happen is he's going to hit that, and it's going to take it in there. Now, if he didn't know what the key was, then you could pull up the manual for the motherboard, and it would be in the manual. They would tell you what that keystroke command was. But if you do it correctly, instead of booting to your operating system, you'll boot to a screen like this.
Right, and this screen is where we start to see a little bit more modernization of what we've been talking about, okay? So here you'll notice at the very top of the screen, there it is, it says ASRock UEFI. Now, Don, this doesn't say BIOS anymore. This says UEFI, and that stands for the Universal Extensible Firmware Interface, if I remember correctly. And this allows us to have a lot more options available to what you and I could do. In the earliest settings, there wasn't this graphic. I couldn't use the mouse at all. I had to just use the arrow keys and, of course, enter and different things that you could do to help you scroll through the different menu options that were available. But overall, though, it does the same thing. But now we have a lot more control, and it's a lot more friendly for somebody to be able to get access in here to see and do.
Yep, and UEFI BIOS popularized itself, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago. So most of the computers that you work on today are going to have a UEFI interface, which is usually a very feature-rich interface. But if you're working on a legacy system, there's plenty of people out there that have computers that are 7 years, 10 years old. Those will have the older legacy BIOS, and that's what Ronnie was describing, that you're not going to be able to use your mouse. You're going to have to use the arrow keys. You're going to have to hit tab to move around and enter. It's not easy. And on those, there'll usually be a little bar at the bottom that will give you some shortcut keys. It'll tell you things like press F10 to save and stuff like that in a legacy. But in the modern UEFI BIOS, which again is what we should see most of the time, you got a mouse and you can navigate around just like you normally do on a computer. Now, Ronnie, what are we looking at here on this first screen? I mean, aside from the note about UEFI.
Yeah, right at the beginning, what we're seeing here are just the system specifications that you're actually seeing for the system itself. So if I take a look in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see, of course, the version of the BIOS that it's showing, as well as the processor, the speed it's currently running. And all this information is good, especially if you need to look information up and you want to verify that everything is actually the way that you want to. And then notice the amount of RAM as well as the different RAM sticks. And this one you can see it's a Crucial with 8 gig sticks here, DDR4 at 2400. Now these sticks, they run at a certain speed, but on certain ones, right, on certain machines, depending on the BIOS itself, you might find out that you can kind of, tweak this, I guess is probably the best word to use.
And you can have problems. I used to have a motherboard that would always misdetect my memory. I had memory that I believe was, I think it was like 1833 speed, and it would always detect it as 1333.
Right.
So that means the memory is running at a slower speed than it should have, and I would just go into BIOS and have to update that. But also it's letting us know here, we've got 8 sticks of memory in this computer, and all 8 have been detected and are healthy. If I only saw 6, I would know that I had 2 that were bad. And not only would I know that I had 2 bad, I would know exactly which slot they were in. So that helps me to know which ones to pull out and go and replace or maybe to reseat or whatever. So this initial screen just gives us that quick overview that helps us to make sure everything is being detected properly.
Yeah, and that's really important, especially when you spend some money in putting together the system that you actually want. You want to make sure that all the RAM shows up. You want to make sure that the CPU that you bought, if you built the system itself, is actually the CPU that the BIOS itself is seeing, because all that's important during the process of everything that we showed you in the boot of all the things there, okay? So what we want to do is want to take you into some of the different menus that you see here. Across the top, you'll see a menu bar, and we want to show you some of those options. Now, one of the most important options as we begin, I'm going to work from the right-hand side to the left-hand side. So up here at the top, you'll see where it says boot, and I'm simply going to click on that boot, and when I do so, that will now expand out the menu for us a little bit more, and what we're looking for is what we call the boot priorities, okay? The boot priority allows me now to pick and choose what order do I want things to boot in, okay? So here you'll see boot options 1, 2, and 3. We're not going to get super deep into it, but if I just click on one of these, you'll see that in the first option, I can choose any one of these devices here. So you'll notice this menu, it shows the hard drives that are available for me if I wanted to go in and boot from this hard drive, or I can use the Windows Boot Manager. If I'm running Windows, that's probably the one that I want, or I can even use that network adapter that Don was talking about to be my first choice. So I can arrange them the way that I want to, and it just depends on what your company or what your system actually needs to get set up. From that point, once you select one, that will change the option right here, and then you can pick another one. And the idea of picking more than one boot option is, well, they'll fail over a lot of times, right? If the first one doesn't work, well, what do you want to go to next, okay? And that way you know that you can always have something that will allow you to boot the computer up, and that's what you want to be able to do. So these boot options are very important. If you set them where you set up one where there's not an operating system it can boot to, well, hopefully what will happen is your second option will come in, and then possibly even your third option if you need to as well. But these are by far the most important in terms of the boot priorities that we see.
Yeah, and a lot of times we don't need to mess with these because, and we didn't see it earlier,
Right.
but that little note that was at the bottom right corner of the screen that said press F2 or delete to get into BIOS, some of them say press F12 to go into a boot menu, and so we can override at one time, but in here it's really handy to come in if you want to make that change permanent, especially if you have multiple hard drives like this server does. Which one do I want to boot from? Or If you have a CD drive, maybe you always want to boot from that CD drive first so you can manipulate it. This is a pretty standard change for a lot of people when they initially set up a computer. Not so much on laptops, because laptops don't normally have extra storage. You only have one boot choice. But on desktops, this is a pretty common thing. But it doesn't stop there. I guess for a lot of people, it probably does stop there. That's the only thing you'd come in here and configure. But there's other options on here. Things like, I can see the boot beep that you mentioned earlier for the diagnostic side. Those are all things that we might choose to configure as well, right?
Yes. So if you go, look, I really want those beeps so I can hear that instead of me having to watch the screen and know that something's going on, I can go ahead and I can configure this by simply selecting that option here, boot beep, and then in the little menu I can select enabled, and now it changes for us. Now this is important. The change that we're seeing right here is going to be held right here, until we exit the system. So it's not going to take place immediately, but when we decide that we're done with the BIOS, it's at that point where we'll either decide to keep it or we won't, and we'll show you that option when we get through. But you'll see that there's actually even more. If I scroll down, there's a bunch of different other options on here, logos and boot failure, some additional things. But most of the time on every system at least, you'll at least see at the top here, okay, those boot options is what you'll end up seeing, and that's probably where you'll do that. But so a lot of options that are available.
Now, some of the things that you can consider configuring here all kind of depend on usage, right? So we mentioned how we only had a brief window of time to be able to press F2 or delete, right? Well, we've got a setup prompt time right there that's set to 1 second. We could bump that up, right? In fact, we probably should have done that before the show. That would have been smart. So make it 3 seconds or something. It's going to slow down the time it takes your computer to boot. On a server, I'm not really worried about that. On a laptop, that might be kind of annoying, right? The boot beep, maybe that annoys you. You can leave it be, but the full screen logo. When this system boots up, it displays a full screen ASRock logo. Well, that logo is hiding some of the things that are going on behind the scenes. So if you want to really learn about computers and see some of that stuff, you can turn off that logo. And now when the system boots up, you'll actually see other output on the screen. And depending on your motherboard, you may see a lot of stuff, you may not. It just kind of depends. So that's a great way to change that boot experience and be able to see a little more. You might also see, and actually, did you already say the power on, like if you lose power?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of them will have an option in here, and it's usually under the boot screen, where it says, like, if you lose power, when power comes back on, what do? Do you boot back up, or do you stay powered off? And that's kind of nice, because if you have a computer, like a server, that you want always on, you want it to boot back up the moment it gets more power. So a lot of crazy stuff in there that can be configured and kind of change the way that system boots.
Yeah, it's really amazing about all the settings that you can change. This is before the operating system ever gets loaded into RAM and that we can use it. So these options, make sure that you take a look at them as you start to study a little bit more. They'll at least help you to get things set up. Now, along with this, of course, we're going to go to the second menu to the left of boot where it says security. And we just want to talk about a couple of different options here. And I want to warn people about this option as well. So let's go ahead and click on security. And then you'll notice that there's a supervisor password and there's a user password. All this stuff actually seems great, right? The more secure you want your system, you go, hey, this is a great option. I want to go ahead and set up this idea of these passwords. And that way, nobody can change the options except for the person that has the passwords here that we've been talking about. Now, Don, that sounds like a great idea. I think that that's 100% the way that I should go a lot of times until I realize something, Don, that I don't actually boot into BIOS very often. And all of a sudden now, 6 months later, as I go, I need to change something on that boot option. I can't remember the password. Now, Don, how easy is it to get this password?
It's usually pretty annoying. If you forget the password, there's nobody you can call to give you the password, right? But typically they'll have some way to reset it. Usually it involves opening up the computer. There might be a button on the motherboard that you hold down, or even a little jumper you have to use to create a contact between two pins. It's not easy. It's not intended to be easy, right? Because when you set a password, you're trying to stop people from getting into BIOS and making changes. If it was easy to reset that password, people would be able to get in there and make changes. So when computers are deployed in schools, universities, hospitals, they'll normally put little locks on the cases to prevent the cases from being opened, which prevents people from getting to the BIOS reset options. So that's why they usually make it a physical button on the board. It's difficult, but hopefully you don't, forget what your password is, but that's a key thing.
Yeah, but I have, and I've actually supported somebody that said, no, I have a password on here, and I said, what's the password? And they're like, oh, I don't know, try this. And about 50 passwords later, we still didn't get it. So this can be one of those very annoying options that are available, but if you do need it for the systems, just like what Don was talking about, here's the option that you can go ahead and set and get this ready to go as well, okay? Now, Don, among those features which are great for settings that we have, okay, we can also see, of course, well, there's a hardware monitor. Now, I want to get to this because I think this is where some of the neat stuff really is. Because of new systems, we can monitor just about anything that we want to. So let me see if I can show you some of the options that are available. So for example, the motherboard temperature right now, well, it's 31 degrees Celsius. I don't know, my conversion in my head is a little bit, but it's a little bit warm.
It's fairly hot.
Yeah, it's fairly hot when you start seeing it. And the same thing with the CPU temperatures. But notice that means that there's a lot of different sensors on this board as well. And that way you can see whether or not you're starting to experience some type of hardware failure that might be going on. Notice you're also seeing voltages that are here. Now, this is not so much you can change a lot of this, right? But what you can do is at least be able to know that your system is monitoring it so that you can now go in and you can also see this too. And you can even, this one has where you can tune the fans right here. Select a fan mode. You can customize and set 5 CPU temperatures and assign a respective fan speed, Don. So I can choose how I want the fan speeds to be at all times, whatever I might want to do, you name it. There's just a lot of neat settings in here.
Yep, and a lot of these things we have to be careful with, right? Because if we, for example, if your fans are noisy, and the fans in this are fairly noisy. If this sat by my desk, it would bother me, right? So you might choose to slow the fans down, but that means your computer's going to get warmer. Now, when we looked at that CPU temperature up there, the motherboard temperature, it was 31 degrees Celsius. Well, 31 Celsius is hot, right? But it's actually within the tolerances of the motherboard. If you look at the manual for your processor, for your motherboard, for your network card, they all have operating temperatures, and that temperature range can actually be pretty big. Sometimes they can go as high as, like in the Fahrenheit world, like 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And you look at it, you're like, 200 degrees, that's crazy, but it's within the operating temperature for that particular thing. Other things can't operate that hot, and they need fans or heat sinks or whatever. So being able to see all that here is really nice. You can also leverage software utilities to see this once your computer is booted. So the BIOS isn't the only place where you can see this.
Yeah, but I just like this because it shows sometimes you'll actually see the voltage changes and the temperature spikes and different things as your system is actually running too. Okay. The next menu over is the tool. As we start seeing it now, this is where it gets a little bit more technical, right? So inside of here, you can update the actual BIOS itself. It shows you all those options, even do things like a secure backup as well as your network configuration for your network adapter. But Don, what I actually like in here is a system browser. So if I wanted to focus in on this system, I can click on this, at least there we go, okay? And now notice that I can actually see certain options, and it even tells me what is here. So this is PCI 3. If we can zoom in, let me see if I can zoom in on the options right here toward, yeah, there we go, okay? So as I zoom in on this, you can see where it actually shows me that option, and then I can see what each one of these devices are as we start going through and actually pull, just like what Don was talking about. Now, underneath here on the bottom, if we scroll down just a little bit more towards the bottom, now let me hover over one of these. Notice it even shows you the profile. So that idea of a profile is a manual setting that we have, whereas the other one at the top here is the kind of automatic setting. Even the CPU, all of the information displayed right here. If I'm not really certain about the system itself internally, I have this that helps guide me.
And Ronnie, if you flip back over one of those memory sticks again, you'll see one of the things that I mentioned just coincidentally. Right now, the memory we have in there is DDR2400, right? But look at the XMP profile that's listed there. It's got a profile for a 2666, which we may or may not be able to support. It's also got 1333. And notice how there's the double speed, right? 1333 doubles to 2666. But you see where it could potentially detect this memory wrong. Maybe we don't have 2400. Maybe we actually do have 2666, and we're not taking advantage of it. So you may need to get in and override those. But be careful. You can push hardware beyond its limits. Now, this motherboard is actually a very fancy motherboard. A lot of them don't have a cool graphic like what we're showing you right now. So if you don't see this in yours, don't be upset. This board is designed for full tuning. So it actually has a whole separate screen for what's called overclocking. All right, overclocking, or OC. Let me get this back to our main screen here. If you look, there's an OC tweaker tab up there. And inside of that OC tweaker, you can actually make your processor run faster than it's intended to run. You can make your memory run faster than it's intended to run. When you do that, you get extra performance out of your system. And the trade-off is it usually runs hotter, which shortens the life of the equipment, and it can potentially lead to errors. You can have crashes if you push it too far. So overclocking is something that most people don't want to do. In an enterprise or a production environment, overclocking is generally bad. For video gamers, a lot of times they'll push their system to try and get the best performance out of it, but it does shorten the overall lifespan of the equipment. So we've always got to keep that in mind. Those are really advanced features beyond what most people are going to have to work with.
Yeah, so Don, I just really want to make sure that we got in here, at least was able to see some of these basic features that we'll find in BIOS. Now remember that we kind of give this overall idea, right? That this is a very fancy board, and if you try and do this on your own computer and all of a sudden you're only getting this screen that's allowing you to just use your keyboard to navigate around, it's doing the basic same things in the background, okay? You just don't have that option to be able to control every feature, whereas this one you do have that option to do so. So make sure you take a look at it as you start to work on different systems that are out there, because this is kind of the foundation, right, of making sure that your motherboard and everything else is working the way that we expect it to work. It's going to be found right here in the BIOS.
All right, now I know we're low on time, but I've got one last question for you, Ronnie, because I've done this myself. When we get into BIOS and we start making changes and we get things set exactly the way we want, if we just push the power button on the computer, we'll be up for a rude awakening,
right?
Because it doesn't save what we do. So what does that process look like to save our settings and make sure they stay in effect?
Right. So remember that exactly like Don said, if you just turn this thing off, all the settings that we made in terms of changes are not going to take effect at all. So what you want to do is we want to go and gracefully exit this system. And up here in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see where it says exit. And now you'll see the different options. Save, changes, and exit. If you do this, it's going to save all the changes. It's going to exit the BIOS and continue on with the boot process. You can discard the changes and exit. And if you do that, once again, it's the same thing, except it's not going to save the changes and still continue on with the boot process itself. But let's say that you go, hey, look, I really just, I want to stay in here, okay? But, you know, I don't want to keep any of the changes I made, because you might not remember. What if you think, I don't know if I'd set that or not? Make sure, but you're still looking around, go ahead and also discard those changes too, and that way you can make sure. But if you haven't touched the board at all, it gives you this option to go back to a factory default, essentially. Load the basic or the default UEFI settings. It gives you all those options right there that are available, and it's something that you might want to make sure that if you're going to make changes and you need them saved, make sure you always exit the way that you want to, and then you select the one that you want, and then at that point, I'm going to discard the changes because this is actually a system that we use on our set here. So I'm going to discard the changes and exit setup. From that point, what should happen, of course, notice the boot process begins again. Everything should come up and start over. And as we do so, as long as I don't press the F2 or the delete key, everything should be fine, and it will continue in the regular boot process that we want and get all the way into the operating system.
All right, well, Ronnie, I think that was a pretty good run through on PC BIOS and what that's going to look like on most systems that are out there. It is a fun, kind of neat, almost like operating system hidden inside of your computer that most people haven't taken a look at. So if you're ever bored, check it out on your own computer. You can see a lot of stuff in there. Do be careful when you're changing settings. But Ronnie, thank you for walking us through that. And for you, the viewers out there, thank you for watching. But that's the end of this episode, so we're going to wrap it up here. Signing off for ITProTV, I'm Don Pezet.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching ITProTV.